Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Lindsey Boylan with us today. She is a former aide to former Governor Andrew Cuomo, and she was the first person to come forward to accuse the former governor of sexual harassment. We'll chat with her and get her story in just a few minutes. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and/or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, let's get to the big things of the week. And one of them is pretty damn big and perhaps the biggest thing to happen in decades. And that is the Signal message app text scandal. As expected, the administration is denying, dismissing, obfuscating, justifying. Everything worked out in the end. All's well that ends well. The end justifies the means, and that's all you should focus on. The bad guys, Houthis in Yemen, were killed. Biden couldn't do it. We did it. And that's all you should care about. Don't care about the rule of law. Don't care about protocols. Don't care about guidelines. Don't care about any of that nonsense, because we knew what was important, and we decided we don't have to follow any of that shit in order to achieve our goals. And that's a really dangerous place to be in when the president of the United States and his administration decide that they can unilaterally do shit and not have to follow any of the stuff that is how America has been governed for the last 249 years. What do you guys think of all that?
Well, it's not just that they were such imbeciles that they invited a journalist in to actually follow an entire chat thread on classified material of war plans. It's the fact that they're using Signal to begin with. And it seems that across the board, throughout the administration, they've requested that their people use Signal to keep all of their communications away from the prying eyes of the actual government, which is supposed to be part of the Records Act. All of this is supposed to be saved for various reasons that makes total sense. So this, again, points to what they did last week when they put a Starlink antenna on top of the White House, which is completely unnecessary for any other reason than if you want to keep your communications outside of the government communication systems. And so this goes to the point of they are completely rogue, they're anti-democratic, and they're pursuing a way of governing that is just whatever they want to do.
And which is precisely why a federal judge issued a restraining order that these texts from the Signal text thread have to be preserved. This is the same old with Trump. The dictator wannabe thinks he's king. The Republican Congress people are all a bunch of fucking cowards. They pledged undying fealty to the king. So the question is, what, if anything, is going to happen here? Is there ever going to be accountability? Republican Senator Roger Wicker, who chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee, he's calling for an inspector general's investigation. So that's a good thing. Whether or not that happens is another story. If I was in Vegas right now, I wouldn't put my money on it. But there are other Republicans and Democrats alike who are also calling for the same thing. So the real question is, where is this going? Does this story have legs? Or is it just going to be swept under the rug in a couple of days and we'll all be talking about something else that Donald Trump has us distracted by?
I think to your point, there are some cracks forming in the dam, and it's Susan Collins, another Republican senator, is also fed up with other problems. The way they're moving ahead and destroying government is affecting enough people that some Republicans are starting to at least push back in the tiniest way.
Yeah. Look, it's 2 months since Trump took office, and there's certainly been enough chaos and destruction taking place to not only raise alarm bells, but to get people angry. We've seen that at the town halls. But it is just 2 months. And so there's going to be a lot more bleeding that people on Capitol Hill experience, people on Wall Street experience, people on Main Street experience. And so we have to be able to look at and say, if it's this kind of crazy right now and people are this angry right now, what's it going to look like in June? What's it going to look like in December? What's it going to look like in November of 2026 when people go to the polls for the midterms? So things are evolving in a way that just doesn't really look great for Trump and the Republican Party. And that's why we may start to see people like Susan Collins and others come forward and stand up to him, perhaps in a way that they haven't before.
Look, the timing is really good because there's a special election next week in Florida on April 1st. There are 2 seats that are up in District 1 and District 6. And you can go out and vote and change the power structure.
That's a really good point. And if people out there who live in Florida 1 or Florida 6, you can go vote in Florida 1 for Gabe Alamont. You can vote for Josh Wheel in Florida 6, and you could change how the House is governed because the Republicans already have a teeny majority. So this is really important. If you're fed up with how the government's running, if you're fed up with watching your retirement savings disappear, if you're fed up with the stock market crashing, if you're fed up with the federal spending cuts in critical services, if you or someone you know has been terminated, if you're just fed up with all of this chaos, you can do something about it on Tuesday. Also, there's a special election for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. Democrats need to maintain their majority in that court. You live in Wisconsin, vote for the Democrat, Susan Crawford, and have Democrats keep control of the Supreme Court. So act. We have an opportunity to act. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner? On Tuesday, Democrats flipped a Trump voting seat in the Pennsylvania State Senate. My loser? Trump cutting funding to Gavi, which will result in the death of 1 million children that easily could be prevented.
My loser is National Security Advisor, liar, and complete moron, Mike Waltz. My winner actually is the University of Toronto, where they've managed to snag from Yale University, friend of the show, Professor Jason Stanley, and 2 history professors, Timothy Snyder and his wife, Marcy Shore, who are leaving the U.S. because of the political situation they've made very clear.
My winner, every lawyer, law firm, the ACLU, and every other legal organization valiantly fighting Trump in court and winning virtually every case. My loser, congressional Republicans who are totally cool with top secret attack plans being texted to a journalist by SecDef Pete Hegseth and other top national security and intelligence officials. And that gets us to the weekly rant. The shitstorm over the Trump administration's handling of classified information involving an imminent attack against Houthi rebels in Yemen should not be viewed in a vacuum. Instead, it's part of a decade-long pattern of assault on our military by Donald Trump. It's no secret that Trump maintains a general disrespect and disdain for the military and its generals, war heroes, Gold Star families, and dead soldiers, who he's referred to as, quote, suckers and losers. Trump is someone who told his former chief of staff, General John Kelly, whose son died in combat in Afghanistan, as they stood at Arlington National Cemetery among those killed in Afghanistan and Iraq, quote, I don't get it. What was in it for them? Trump is someone who did not want to be seen in the presence of military amputees because, quote, it doesn't look good for me. Trump is someone who canceled a commemoration in France for U.S. soldiers and Marines killed during World War I because it was raining, and he reportedly didn't want to mess up his hair. Trump is someone who said former U.S. Senator and decorated POW John McCain wasn't a, quote, war hero because he was, quote, abjured. Trump is someone who suggested that former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mark Milley is a traitor who should be punished by death. And Trump is someone who is now defending his senior-most defense, national security, and intelligence officials over the allegedly illegal use of an unsecured message app, Signal, for a bizarre, emoji-filled, jacked-up frat boy circle jerk about an imminent attack against the Houthis. A text thread filled with classified info, which inadvertently included journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. This staggering leak of highly sensitive details could have been hacked by China or Russia and landed in the hands of the Houthis. And they do possess the weaponry to take down our planes. And that would have killed Air Force pilots and Navy seamen. And let's not forget the tremendous indiscriminate cutbacks being made by Elon Musk and Doge at the Veterans Administration for essential, often life-saving services, or the massive cutbacks in federal spending across every agency, where veterans comprise 30% of the workforce. No, this is not a president or an administration which values those who literally risk their lives to defend and protect America. This is a president who is jealous of the military because he knows it's comprised of courageous, patriotic men, and he's just a 5 deferment, draft-dodging coward. No, Donald Trump doesn't give two fucks about the military or our veterans. He is the most military hostile commander-in-chief in U.S. history. And now he presides over a military which is more obsessed with how perfectly its beds must be made than the dangerous spillage of classified info that endangers the lives of the brave soldiers who sleep in them. All right, let's bring on Lindsey Boylan. She has spent her career in urban planning and public service. She is the former Deputy Secretary for Economic Development and Housing for New York and served as special advisor to former Governor Andrew Cuomo. She was the first woman to come forward with accusations about Cuomo's alleged abuse of women and his related abuses of power. An unapologetic feminist, her words have appeared in leading publications including Vanity Fair, Harper's Bazaar, Teen Vogue, Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, and Gothamist. Lindsey, welcome into the back room.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy.
So for those listeners who might not be aware, can you please walk us through your experience with former Governor Andrew Cuomo?
Sure. Well, I always like to start by kind of saying the context of why I went to work for the state. I've loved the political realm my entire life. When I moved to Northern Virginia in high school, national politics was the conversation, and it was a time when women were getting more and more into the political scene. Senator Hillary Clinton came into office, and that was a really exciting time as a teenager. And I thought it was really powerful, and I loved the idea of going to a field where you could positively influence so many lives, and you could find a way to make change from the things maybe that had happened to you growing up and whatnot, by engaging in politics. And I still believe that. So I spent the majority of my career in urban planning and around public policy. Ultimately, I worked for the state for a little over 3 years, starting in a chief of staff economic development role, and then moving ultimately as Secretary for Economic Development and Housing for the Governor, Andrew Cuomo, and a special advisor to him. So I was pretty senior in the administration. And I do like to say that, half of that job was amazing because it was a big job and I got to do really important work. And the other 50% was a really toxic work environment that I think so many people have heard about. I, unfortunately, like so many women, have experienced sexual harassment throughout my career to varying degrees, but never in my career, in my life, had I experienced an environment that was entirely set up to feed this toxic, predatory beast, in my view, in Andrew Cuomo. It wasn't just that he would make these terrible remarks, that he would grab at women. He would do all these things to try and find ways to be inappropriate with you. And I think we've seen that across the board in many of the 3 investigative reports. But all of the people who worked around him were set up to feed the predator. So he would identify women that, for whatever reason, he wanted closer to him. And all of these people would be set up to feed that predatory environment. And I've discussed various parts of that in the investigation that the Attorney General conducted. I like to describe it as, because, we all have experienced sexual harassment to a certain extent, I think, as women. But this environment was almost like feeding a mouse to a snake. You hit the mouse, an abusive way of doing it, that you would see a mouse be hit against the glass of a container to stun it so that a snake could eat it. And that's what it felt like working for Andrew Cuomo. And I did so for a very long time because this was my lifelong dream, to work in an environment and be taken seriously and to help people. And it was devastating for that not to be my own reality. But I think what ended up being worse, and to turn to, why we're talking today, is that ultimately I left. It was extremely toxic and decided to, go out on my own. But as I kind of got my own footing in my own political career, I started talking about it being a difficult environment. I didn't say anything about the sexual harassment, so to speak, but a young woman reached out to me on Twitter and she said, I worked for Andrew Cuomo and he sexually harassed me. Can I call you? And I believed her immediately. I didn't even need to talk to her. I knew what she was saying was true. And when I did talk to her, I felt horrible because my not speaking up had enabled her harm from this man. And she could be my little sister. She's significantly younger than I. And I felt really responsible for what had happened to her because I hadn't spoken up, because I hadn't found a way to stop it. And, that was mulling in my head when we spoke. And then a few days, within a few days, his name was being floated potentially for attorney general. And those two things, I couldn't operate. I knew I had to do something. And so I started tweeting about his sexual harassment. And the next year or so unfolded with the attorney general's investigation, two subsequent investigations, including the state assembly's investigation, and Biden's Department of Justice found that he harassed all of us, and did so with a tremendous amount of proof, interviews and documents, hundreds of thousands of them. Unfortunately, the abuse didn't stop once he resigned. He said for one moment in his resignation that he felt bad for making us all feel uncomfortable, and that the line had shifted in his career in terms of our culture and what we accept for how men treat women. But then he proceeded to spend the next several years to today harassing us all legally in the court of law. Just to level set, three of the women decided to sue him in civil court, because that's typically where sexual harassment is adjudicated in this day and age, given the legal framework that we have. I was not one of those women. I had a young daughter at the time, and it was taxing enough to be the first woman to come forward and be smeared and harassed for doing that work. So I didn't want to do that. But it has not prevented this former disgraced governor from using, when we count all of his legal bills, including the sexual harassment, $60 million in taxpayer money to harass all of the women who were brave enough to come forward against him, not just the ones who were suing him, but myself as well, in basically a way to keep us quiet and to keep more women from coming forward, because you can bet there aren't just a dozen women that he harassed many more. And I guess we find ourselves here today because he's continuing his attempts at coming back. And I have the privilege, I'm older, keep this in mind, I'm the old lady of the group of the women that worked for him that he harassed. I'm a good decade older than most of them. Most of them are like, they could be my little sisters, someone who worked for me, not in a pejorative sense, but just to level set. And I have the privilege to speak up. I'm paying my own attorney's fees. I've had to pay almost, when this is all over, probably, $2 million in legal fees just to defend myself as a potential witness. But I have to speak up because most of the women don't have my privilege. They are not as old as me, and they don't have the legal representation I do, and they don't have the platform I do. So as long as it takes, I'm going to make sure that people know who this monster is. And I think all sexual harassment is bad and has a toxic, corrosive impact on the workplace and on our culture. This is at a next level that people really need to understand. So I'm really excited to be here today. And I know I spoke a lot, but just wanted to level set.
No, that context is really, really important because there is so much to unpack. And I want to discuss a lot of that stuff that you just mentioned in a little bit. But I want to go back to when you were in the administration, because I'm curious to know, was harassment prevalent from the get-go, or does it build over time? Like, how did it evolve for you?
Sure. Well, one thing I will say is that his sexual harassment of women is an open secret in all of state government. And I'll give you an example. When I was originally appointed to a position in the administration, I wasn't going to be working directly with him. And I've had enough experience working in our own government that I didn't have any sense that we would be working together. But I did speak to someone who had been a peer and colleague, the one who headed up a business nonprofit in the city of New York for a long time. And when I told her about this job, she said to me, literally, be careful, stay away from the governor. He's got a problem with women. And I just had to kill a story in the New York Times about him and women. And that was scary. It stood out because this was a serious person involved in serious business and politics in the city of New York. If I named the organization, a lot of people would know it. And it was something I filed, but one, I wasn't going to be working directly for him. And two, as I mentioned to you, and I think most women who watch this or listen will know, sexual harassment is pervasive. And so someone telling me that I have to stay away from someone is something I've heard a lot in my career, unfortunately. And that I think is sad and worth mentioning. So I knew that, but I wasn't going to be working directly for him. And Trump was, right around the time that Trump won the election is when I started working there. And so this was one of the best places to be. This was like the Olympics if you wanted to be involved with government and trying to help people as a Democrat, particularly when you're in the opposition party, so to speak. And so I'd worked my whole career. I mean, I went to Wellesley because Hillary went there. I was student body president because Hillary did it, and I was inspired. And so I wasn't going to let this idea prevent me from my dreams. But what I will say is it was immediate. And as soon as I interacted at an event with the governor, he had picked me out and mentioned to my boss, asked about me. And, it started pretty immediately. The scary thing was, and I think a lot of the women who he harassed were juniors. So maybe they were in an executive administrative role. Maybe they were in a junior policy role and they couldn't speak. Maybe it was the first job out of college and they needed that job. For me, it was terrible in a different way because I had worked my whole career to be taken seriously and be in these rooms. And I don't know how to quite explain how devastating it is to work so hard and have have a good amount of your work be incredibly important. I ran the state's recovery work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. I oversaw all of the housing portfolio and the business development portfolio for the state. I helped pass through getting the business community aligned, $15 minimum wage and paid family leave. But then another part of that was being sexually harassed and kicked out by the governor. He had his executive assistant early on send me an email after I thanked him for the opportunity to work on a project, saying that I looked like Lisa Shields. But I was her prettier younger sister. I had no idea who that was. So I Googled her and she happened to be one of his ex-girlfriends. So it started like that. And that was in response to me thanking him for the opportunity through his administrative assistant to work on a particular project. So what do I do here? It was a meaningful project. It was really important work. And then I was being typified in this follow-up email. And I will say a lot of people saw this throughout the years that I worked for him. It was open knowledge. If there was a woman that he found attractive, and he does seem to have a few types, a lot of the women kind of look like me, they were going to be picked out and he was going to take them. And it's scary when you think of this person was the most powerful person in the state. So where are you going to go? What are you going to do? I think one of the great examples, not necessarily mine, but reading about, is the state trooper. Her job was to protect this man with her life. If there was going to be a gunman, she was going to take a bullet for him. But all the time that she was willing to do that and doing her job, he was sexually harassing her. Someone who was supposed to protect his life with hers. Or there was another, one of the other women that I did know indirectly was an executive assistant for him. And there was one really telling piece of one of her depositions where she said, the state troopers were right outside the office, but I knew they were there to protect him, not me. And I just convey this because every time I would go to a meeting, I would have all of my skills, all of the years of experience. I went to student body president at Wellesley, Columbia Business School, municipal finance. I ran Bryant Park operationally for years. I have a serious career, and I would go in there to meetings with him, prepared to do my serious work and passionate about that work. And it could be that work, and I had to perform at the highest level, but it could also be accosting me and kissing me as I walk out of his office. And that stuff is really, it's still hard for me to talk about because it's humiliating. Anyone who thinks that this kind of experience is fun to talk about, there is nothing I wanted less in my career than to have to be belittled or made out to be some kind of a doll for some powerful man when I take my passion for this field seriously. And so I hope I can convey that to people, because I don't think women really ever speak up about sexual harassment because it benefits them. It certainly hasn't benefited me monetarily. It hasn't benefited me in any way. The only way it's benefited me is I feel more myself than I ever have been. I feel more in touch with other women and their lived experiences than I ever have been. But how humiliating to work your whole career, to be taken seriously, work so hard, sacrifice so much, and then have a decent piece of that be a terrible experience. And so I didn't want to talk about it, because so often what happens is it diminishes the woman who is being harassed. And So I hope that conveys kind of some of what you were asking.
And you alluded to before the culture. In your experience during your time there, was that pervasive with other men in the administration?
I kept wishing there were all these powerful men who worked for him and they all knew how he acted. Do I think all of the men are monsters and abusers like him? No. But they certainly didn't do anything to stop him. Bill Mulrow, who worked for him and is helping him on his campaign, Larry Schwartz, a lot of these people, Joe Percoco, who went to prison for him, these are people who knew who he was and would do everything they could to protect him. So while they may not have been abusive sexual harassers themselves, they were helping to continue that process. I'll give you another example. Rick Cotton was someone very high in the administration. He's had a great career, a legal career and whatnot in the city of New York. And I'll never forget one time I was tasked with trying to bring in folks from, I think, the Hillary Clinton campaign once she had lost to the administration, because it's a good way to, get, talented people who need a position. And there was some difficulty with one particular person that he wanted, and happened to be an attractive woman that he wanted to hire. And I was somehow tasked with hiring a bunch of people, including her. And Rick Cotton said to me, "The governor gets what the governor wants." And I will never forget that, because he really meant whatever he wants. And he really meant that I needed to be a part of this. And it was a disgusting experience. And so, no, do I think all of the men were abusers and sexual harassers? No. But absolutely all of the senior people were complicit in his harassment and his abuse. And frankly, one of the saddest stories to me is a woman who went to women's college. There's nothing more. My mom had my sister at 16. I come from a family of women who've had a lot of hardship. So underlying a lot of my passion for this field is making things better for women. And there were women in senior roles who were feeding this monster, this predatory monster. It was women who emailed me saying he thought I was attractive. It was women who were trying to make sure I was on the same flight as him, so he could be there with me in this gross, ambiguous, sexually harassing way. And so that was sad. Some people hate women, and some of those people are women. And I think that was a huge aspect to this culture of abuse.
It sounds like what you're describing is a similar cult of personality that we see with Donald Trump.
It's the same. For years before I ever said exactly what happened to me, people would ask me what it was like to work for him. And I said, he's just like Donald Trump, except with the D next to his name and without the money. They're the same person. This concept of an abusive person who is really morals free, who will do anything to attain power, and frankly is also adept. If there's one or two skills they're both adept at, in my view, it's their shamelessness and their ability to manipulate media. The minute a bad story comes out about either of them, they're on some other circus wheel to get your attention, which there's a very bad series of stories yesterday for the disgraced former governor. And lo and behold, he's coming out with an endorsement of Gregory Meeks, who is one of the worst members of Congress in terms of corruption, but, changing the conversation. Those are the two skills that they both have. And they're, to my eye, one and the same kind of person.
And so earlier this month, you had a story published in Vanity Fair titled "Andrew Cuomo for Mayor? His first accuser says New York City deserves better." I want to read something from that. You write, quote, "Although some pundits have been insisting that enough time has passed and that certain men who have fallen from power should be allowed to regain it, that stance is misguided because men like Cuomo never really lose power. They maintain their positions because people who are very powerful themselves are still afraid of them." Are people afraid of Andrew Cuomo right now?
I mean, it is in some ways reminiscent of when I first came forward. People privately say, "Give me a pat on the back. You're so brave. We're so proud of you. Thank you." And they'll do nothing themselves. And these are very powerful people. They were members of Congress. They're members of very powerful institutions in the city. They'll reach out to me, just as one example of that. But you can be sure that the majority of the collection of people who are endorsing him are doing so because they're getting something from him. They have gotten something from him, or they're afraid of him. Look at even the responses from our senators in New York and our minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Between Hakeem Jeffries and Gillibrand, they both said, well, we'll see. Basically, they passed the torch, and they were both people, not even passed the torch. That sounds too ethical. They basically just passed the buck on accountability of saying anything about this person that they know. And they were required to write press releases telling him to resign when he did and saying what he did was bad. I highlight Senator Gillibrand here because she spent most of her career talking about sexual harassment and sexual violence and sexual abuse towards women, and to her great credit. And yet in this case, she basically said it's up to the voters and did nothing there. And I take great exception to that, because if I can, and women who have everything to lose, who actually experience the trauma and frankly are experiencing it again, can come forward and say this is wrong, in spite of being against a maniacal, manipulative, tyrannical person who is running a personal vendetta right now, I can speak up. I expect my senator to. It's depressing and terrible. And the only thing good about it is we can never really fix these problems unless we see the extent of them, and unless it's in full relief for all of us. And I think it is. And I'm certainly doing everything I can to make sure it's in full relief, because people, I love to live in politics. As I started the story, I find it powerful to change people's lives and to do good for them. But most people don't want to, even my friends like, oh, Lindsey, I don't want to hear about this politics stuff. So we have to remind them. Do I wish that people would think about the cost that it has taken for women, myself, but many of us included, to come forward? Yes, but we're going to remind folks. And the other piece that I really wanted to achieve with the Vanity Fair article that I wrote was to connect his abuse of women to his broader abuse of power. Because it's really all the same thing. If you abuse women that work for you, if you lie about the abuse, you manipulate systems and sources of power to feed your own disgusting desires, you're doing that with everything. And we see that in his career, his bullying of Andy Byford, who was really our best leader in mass transit in the city. He left because of this monster. He bullies people into silence. He creates environments that appear as though they're helping people, but in reality, he's doing the opposite. I think his COVID press conferences are a great example of that, and it's really the same thing. So this man went on air every day, said, "I'm the hero. I'm going to tell you what to do." Meanwhile, he's doing several things that are the opposite. One, he prevented Mayor Bill de Blasio at the time from going into lockdown when it actually would have had an impact at that early onset of community spread, just for their kissing contest, because he hates the mayor. And then he forced nursing home COVID positive patients back into the nursing homes legally. He forced these nursing homes to take them. And COVID spread like wildfire and killed so many nursing home seniors. And then he hid those numbers. His right-hand person admitted to hiding the true scale of death because of that policy. And then thirdly, he wrote a book about his success during this time that he got $5 million for. And he didn't even write it because a bunch of his staff, that are government employees, participated in putting that piece together. When you put all those examples together, he's giving this COVID press conference. You're thinking, what a hero, Emmy, Emmy, Emmy. But behind the scenes, he's doing the opposite. That is exactly what he did to women. He purported to be some kind of Me Too leader. And actually, he got Time's Up to not support me, as it's been widely covered in the news, because they said this guy has been our friend. Well, see, these are the two same things. He's putting one projection out there to do the opposite behind the scenes, using actual resources for the community good to his own ends, and then lying about it. And he continues to lie about both of those things to this day.
You mentioned bullying before. Do you feel bullied still by him, or have you been bullied by anyone in his sphere of influence?
Oh, constantly. I mean, Rita Glavin, his taxpayer-funded attorney, I have, when I wrote the Vanity Fair piece, when I attended a rally against his run, she sent letters on a taxpayer dime to the court, maligning me, suggesting that I need I had, I had some ulterior motives, that means some negative thing about the cases that he is trying to pull me into, even though I'm a non-party. In the last, since he's announced his race just alone, me simply reminding folks what he's done has cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And I tried to connect in that Vanity Fair piece how the sexual harassment stopped, but the legal lawfare and legal abuse really just took shape. And I had, as I mentioned to you, decided not to sue him because it has been a traumatic experience being the human shield against this monster. And I was the first human shield, and it was enough. I told the world what happened. He had to resign. And I did not want to pursue legal recourse against him, but I've still been dragged into every one of his cases. And even the judge in one of the cases called what he is doing with his taxpayer-funded attorney scorched earth tactics. If you were a really wealthy person and you were enmeshed in a legal issue like this, you wouldn't do what he's doing because you still are spending your own money. He's not spending any of his own money. This is all on the taxpayer dime. And none of these cases, whether we're talking about the sexual harassment or we're talking about the nursing home scandal and his misdeeds there and his lies to Congress about it in the COVID select committee, none of them are at trial. This is all pre-trial, and it's $60 million and counting of taxpayer money.
Putting aside whether or not taxpayers should be outraged by that or not, the reality is, I guess, with any politician, if they are accused of something while they're serving in their official capacity, the government for which they're working for is going to be footing the bill for that.
Yeah, well, but what I would say to that end is I don't think anyone has ever seen this kind of broad abuse of that public officer's law. So it's to protect high-level officials, to your point, against injurious litigation that prevents them from doing their job, right, that they're elected to do. But what it has become is, for example, me, I've had over a dozen subpoenas in one case alone that I'm not a party to. Every aspect of my life, including my campaign intern, who was a Barnard student at the time, who's a survivor of domestic abuse, was receiving these subpoenas that has nothing to do with anything. Now he's trying to use taxpayer money to sue the attorney general. I totally agree with you on a baseline. There's a reason to have this public officer law for basic protections. What this man has turned it into is like everything else he turns power into. It's an abuse of power. And I do want to remind folks that while he has availed himself of this public officer law, none of the women he harassed are having their legal bills paid, whether they're suing him or not. None of that is covered. It's because he's the defendant here. And also these women, many of them were more early on in their career in junior, but I was a public officer seniority wise, and none of my bills are paid for here. Just to kind of level set this, how unfair and wrong it is. Do I agree that we should have baseline defenses for people who serve us to make sure that they are covered from, basic unfair litigation that prevents them from doing their job? Absolutely. What he has turned it into is a complete abuse of power. I think that's a great example.
Yeah. And again, to bring it back to Trump, we've seen how Trump's lawyers have walked into the Supreme Court and attempted to have a legitimate conversation that if the president wanted to use SEAL Team 6 to murder his opponents, that should be okay.
And it's all part of the same societal problem. That's, I try to remind myself of this when I think, it's a terrible thing to be living in this fight for so long. I want nothing to do with this monster. He's disgusting to me. I don't want to hear his name. I don't want to see him. I never want to hear about him again. He's a monster. But if I really care about helping people, these problems are all connected. Whether we're talking about Trump or we're talking about what Andrew Cuomo is trying to do, it's all part of the same problem in our society and abuses of power. And so, I guess if I say I want to help people, then I'm going to find a way to make this meaningful.
Just to play devil's advocate for a second, I'm sure there are people out there who are saying, you've gone through the bullying, you've gone through mental anguish, you're experiencing financial hardship, you're experiencing all the things that would come with a lawsuit. Why not just sue? What do you say to those people?
It'll be years in court. My daughter is just turned 11 last week. And she has spent the last several years, probably her formative memorial years of memory, early years of memory, me in this battle. And I want to go on to much better things. And I will say, in the case, there are three women who've decided to sue him. In one case, at the federal level, Charlotte Bennett decided to drop her lawsuit against him. And that was because he abused her through the legal system in ways I can't even imagine. She discussed wanting to die. And at times I felt like I wanted to die. I can't go back to that place. He subpoenaed gynecological records for her. I mean, in the case of her, in that case, in any of these cases, if you're the woman suing, the level of anguish and trauma. I've spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars in trauma therapy over the last 2 years, and that is to move forward with my life. And what I wanted originally when I came forward was for the abuse to stop. If you had told me when I came forward that he was going to ultimately resign, I think I would have been really shocked. I just didn't think it was going to happen. He's such a monster, and I thought he would find ways to scare people out of holding him accountable. But that was what I wanted. I didn't have the expectation of getting anything from this experience other than feeling like it needed to stop and feeling responsible that it happened to women that were younger than I. And in my life, probably one of the most important things is mentorship of women, and it's so meaningful to me. And I had inadvertently maybe contributed to other women having this happen to them because I didn't speak up first. And so I never wanted to deal with this man. It's traumatizing and disgusting to have him be doing this right now. But on a deeper level, it's even just worse to have to continue to hear his name. There's so many things I want to do in my life that have nothing to do with this guy. And I have no interest in meeting him in the court of law.
So back in 2021, as you've alluded to before, every New York congressional Democrat, the state's legislative leaders, President Joe Biden, all condemned Cuomo's behavior and said he should resign. 4 years later, feeling pretty redeemed and even empowered, he's now running for New York City mayor.
Yeah.
And most of these politicians have been silent.
Yes.
How does that make you feel as he's attempting to step into another very powerful role?
I honestly, it's scary to me. I think there's a certain amount of the emotions that I really can't tackle right now because we're in the middle of this, and I just don't. I'll have to unwrap it. 3 years of therapy. I don't have the time to be angry. I don't have the time to be afraid. We have to defeat this monster. So every time I'm disappointed with the lack of leadership from people who absolutely know better, I just have to keep moving because there's not time to really address that right now. So it's kind of a triage system, candidly. But, I and the other women were and have been human shields for all these other people who know what a bad man he is, don't want him back, but aren't willing to put their names out there, elected officials. And that feels terrible. I think it's also a symptom of our time. What are we seeing on Capitol Hill? We're not really being, in my view, a great opposition party. We're not putting up any opposition. It's all part of the same bigger problem. So if I really had time to sit down and think about it, I think I would be a lot more disturbed, but there's just too much work to be done. I refuse to just let this man be the mayor of the city that my daughter lives in, that all of the women that I care about and love live in, that you live in, your daughter, sometimes, or before she moved away. So there's just too much work to be done. I am frustrated that politicians sign up for jobs that say they're going to be leaders and they're going to protect us, and they force a bunch of people who aren't in those positions to continue to do that work instead, which is what they're doing right now. And make no mistake, I get tons of outreach from electeds or private emissaries saying, thank you, this is wrong. We're going to stop him somehow. Well, they're not really doing anything. And it's because they're afraid of him. And that was, I'm glad you pinpointed that early in the conversation, because that's really one of the biggest scary things. That's how fascism, that's how all these negative things in society happen, because people who know better don't speak up.
What about Governor Kathy Hochul? She was Cuomo's lieutenant governor at the time. She had called his alleged behavior with women, quote, repulsive and unlawful.
Yep.
Are you satisfied with her current response or lack thereof to his candidacy in particular?
So I worked with the governor when she was lieutenant governor, and I was there. I have respect for her. I liked her. Do I think she's doing enough? I would like her to be doing much more. I think what she's trying to do is not heavy foot it in the mayor's race. But I really urge all of our leaders, including the governor, to really speak up on this, because she does know what a bad man he is. She knows exactly who he is. And I've said this on numerous occasions, because sometimes people say, well, she's in cahoots with him. There is no love lost between these two people. And he was monstrous to her, not in a sexually harassing way, but he belittled her. He maligned her. And everyone who worked for him really, sidelined her. And so I know she knows what a bad man he is. And I do think she should be doing more. And I hope that she does.
Why do you think Cuomo's the front runner?
It's two things. Name recognition. So he's got 100% name recognition. And I will also add, it's about very low favorability. I think one recent poll said he had like 30% favorability. So that's not a great story. You would think the most powerful man in the state, at one time, one of the most powerful men in the country, who comes from a political dynasty, who married into another political dynasty, you would expect them to be able to get some significant support right off the bat.
But what does it say about the electorate?
I think it's frustrating, because I struggle with the fact that I live my life in this political world that I love, and most people don't. I think it has a lot to do with that. People have their own problems and they don't want to focus on something. They hear someone saying, my name, and put it down when it comes to the June 24th primary. But I do caution to say there are many good candidates running. A lot of them have raised a lot of money, have very good experience, and they haven't spent much of that money. So right now they're at that phase where they were ramping up to their fundraising. And now is the time where we start to see them communicate two things. And I'm in touch with, I think, a vast majority of the campaigns, because I want one of them to win, is they're going to continue to ramp up his abuses of power, to show his high negatives so people are reminded. And they're going to say, this is who I am. And they're going to spend a lot of money on making sure New Yorkers know who they are, especially with these public matching funds. So we need to give it time. I think we need to be patient. I'm not patient with anything because this is so important to me, but I caution us to take too seriously polls right now, and particularly polls that two of the most recent, press getting polls were paid for by Tusk Strategies, as I recall. And they are working for Andrew Cuomo, both in a volunteer and paid capacity. So as someone who spent their life in politics to a certain extent, I want to reiterate that polls frequently, unfortunately, are created and crafted with a specific outcome in mind. And I think that's very much the case in the polls that we've seen. He's working off of 100% name recognition. And the favorability number is going to go down and down and down, particularly as these other candidates who are really well positioned to do the job of the mayor continue to make themselves known. And odd as it sounds, sometimes it's the last week before the primary that someone says, hey, I'm going to vote. And this is the name I'm going to vote for. Mm-hmm. I'm spending a lot of time on it. You were talking about it. So we're both living in this, but a lot of people don't. And the next several months is going to be about that conversation and these candidates elevating their name. And I also want to bring up one other wrinkle here that I think is important, is the ranked choice voting system. So this will be our second mayoral election with ranked choice voting. And that's very different than saying, you vote for one person. In this case, you vote for 5 people and you rank them. And there's very good campaigns, several, to get people not to rank Andrew Cuomo and not to rank Eric Adams, but to rank 5, as I called it, to easily explain to people, 5 good apples. And that's 5 people that you can get on board with for the mayor's position. Rewind to the last mayoral election. Eric Adams won barely by a few thousand votes in one of the later ranked choice voting counts against Catherine Garcia. And again, by only a few thousand votes. So if we can mobilize enough people to understand the ranked choice voting and to rank 5 good apples, first, obviously being the one that they want the most, and up to 5 being the ones they can live with. And none of those people are Eric Adams, and none of those people are Andrew Cuomo. we're going to defeat him.
Donald Trump has reshaped the political landscape where being morally and ethically bankrupt, corrupt, and even a convicted felon is no longer a liability. Is Andrew Cuomo benefiting by this stunning paradigm shift?
I think it's easy, and I think we struggle with this daily. I struggle with this. It's easy to say that if the world is run by a bad man, or if the country is run by a bad man, it will only leave room for bad people. But I think that makes courageous leadership even more of an important thing and more noticeable. It's times like these where it is that much more important to be ethical. I'm not saying be perfect. I don't know anyone who's perfect. I don't know any politician who's perfect. And that desire to have a perfect politician is what has made us a lot of sick politicians. But I think this is such a great opportunity for people who want to participate in the political world to actually show courage and leadership. So I don't feed into that. But one thing I do want to touch on, and I appreciate you mentioning Trump again, is that people have this idea because of Eric Adams' potential prosecution that he's, very reasonably potentially co-opted by the Trump administration, that to evade legal, accountability, that he'll do whatever Trump wants. And there's some proof that that would be the case. What I will tell you is Andrew Cuomo will be much more co-optable on that front. He has already been known to lie to the COVID Select Committee of Congress, and that is chaired by a Republican, but also the minority leadership on that committee chastised him for his poor leadership at the very least, and unethical work. They've referred him for criminal prosecution. This man, who some people want to be mayor because Eric Adams did bad things and is co-optable, is so much more co-optable. He's potentially on the hook for criminal prosecution from the reference from the COVID Select Committee. He's just been found in the latest newspapers to have lied to the Attorney General about the nature of sexual harassment and the toxic work environment that he fostered. And there's more accountability on the forefront. I'm willing to bet, both on the nursing home scandal, the book deal that the state's version of the Supreme Court, which is the appellate court, already said they can continue to investigate. He's got all these legal problems, way more, much deeper, and across the horizon than Eric Adams. And I'm not saying Eric Adams is great. I'm just saying this guy has that much more, and he's much more co-optable. And then, just as an aside, my understanding is that Andrew Cuomo and Trump, to a certain extent, grew up knowing each other. I read that Donald Trump was at Andrew Cuomo's bachelor party. These are people, he was a funder of Andrew Cuomo's various political campaigns. Andrew Cuomo's not giving back his money from these campaigns, as I understand it. This is a person who is already beholden. He's much more co-optable by Donald Trump through serious legal jeopardy. And he's going to be much worse than Eric Adams. So I know you started that question about, this broader context, but always a room for people to be courageous in really bad times. And secondly, if there's any connection, he's going to be much more co-optable than Eric Adams is.
Lindsey, thank you for coming on and spending some time with us and sharing your story.
I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation, really good questions. And thank you so much, Andy.
All righty. Take care. All right, we're going to take another call from our good pal, Colton. Colton Blue. Colton, welcome back into the back room.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have you been following Signalgate, this whole scandal about Signal and the text messaging amongst the people in our Defense Department and national security and intelligence agencies?
Well, yes, I've been following it to a degree, yes. I mean, it's been all over the news, so I've heard something about it.
What do you think about it?
Well, it's not too, it's not unusual for the signal to get all screwed up. You ever been on like a phone when suddenly somebody else's voices start coming on your phone and you realize that the signal somehow got connected from your phone to somebody else's a couple of floors up? So that's what happens sometimes with this whole internet thing, is the signal is, it connects people it shouldn't with the internet stuff.
Signal is the name of a messaging app. This scandal that's taking place right now, it's not about a bad Wi-Fi signal. This is not about Wi-Fi or the internet. This is senior people who are discussing an imminent attack of terrorists in Yemen. They're having this conversation over the Signal app on personal cell phones, and all of it is unsecured, and it could be hackable. I mean, you understand the difference that I'm making between Signal, the message app, and a Wi-Fi signal, and why this is all dangerous?
Well, I'm not a computer expert, so I don't really understand what the different signals are. But I know that signals out there can get convoluted and mixed up, because it's just like when you're on a radio and you get you're going from station to station. Sometimes the stations blur because the signals got screwed up. I mean, it's not that complicated. You guys are turning it into some big thing. And it's like, I mean, heck, if you want to blame somebody, go all the way back to Al Gore. He's the one who started all this in the first place. You're asking me questions about things I don't know. What I do know is that this is all a bunch of nothing. It was a mistake from a mix-up signal. And nope, that's all that's going on here.
Well, there was a lot of sensitive classified information that was put over a very unsecured text thread, and that could have put our servicemen and women in danger. And that's what this is all about. So it is kind of a big thing, but we're going to leave it at that. Colton, thanks for hopping on with us, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
That was Colton Blue, also known as my actor pal from L.A., Nathan Dean. We'll talk to both of them again soon. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.